HOA, Karen stabbed my pregnant wife with a knife. Unaware, I'm the chief minister. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday night. The rain had stopped just minutes before, leaving the street slick and shining under the street lamps. But the sound that cut through the night wasn't rain. It was a scream. My wife's scream. When I ran outside, barefoot and half awake, the first thing I saw was red, bright, glistening red smeared across our white driveway. She was lying there, clutching her belly, her hands trembling, her eyes searching for me. For a split second, my mind refused to believe what I was seeing. The knife, our kitchen knife, lay on the pavement beside her. And standing a few feet away was Karen, our next-door neighbor, her yellow HOA badge glinting under the porch light, her face twisted with something between panic and fury. "She came at me," she shouted, though her voice cracked halfway. I didn't respond. I just knelt down, pressed my hands over my wife's wound, and felt the warmth of her blood seeping through my palms. "Hold on, love, just hold on," I whispered, even as sirens began echoing down the block. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the wet asphalt. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the police radio chatter approaching. Neighbors peeked from their curtains, faces pale, whispers trembling, but no one came out. No one dared. When the ambulance doors slammed shut, I looked straight at Karen. Her hands were shaking now, but her arrogance hadn't vanished. She had no idea who I was or what that would mean for her life starting tomorrow morning. Before you hear what happened next, tell me, if your pregnant wife had just been stabbed by your neighbor, what would you have done? 3 months before that night, life had felt almost perfect. My wife, Emily, and I had just moved into Maplewood Estates, a peaceful, gated community lined with oak trees and picture-perfect lawns. It was the kind of place that looked like a real estate ad. Families jogging at dawn, mailboxes painted white, and an HOA board that prided itself on keeping the neighborhood in harmony. Emily was 6 months pregnant then, glowing like morning sunlight. She loved tending to the little flower patch near our porch, planting marigolds and lavender to calm her nerves. I'd watch her every morning before work, humming softly while brushing dirt off her palms. Those small moments felt sacred. We bought this house as a promise, a place to raise our child away from the noise of politics and city life. Most people didn't know who I really was. I wasn't just another homeowner, I was the youngest chief minister in state history. But here I wanted anonymity, just to be Mr. Harris, the husband, the soon-to-be father, not the man who signed executive orders. The neighbors seemed friendly enough at first. The Johnsons brought cookies. Old Mrs. Lane waved from her porch. Even Karen Mitchell, head of the HOA, came by with a forced smile and a clipboard full of community guidelines. She looked me up and down before saying, "We like things tidy here. No loud tools, no overnight guests, and absolutely no unsightly decorations." I remember Emily laughing about it later. She probably measures the grass every morning. I laughed too, but part of me noticed how Karen's eyes lingered too long on our car, on the security guard who opened our gate, on the faint accent in Emily's voice. There was something sharp under her politeness. Still, we tried to blend in. Emily hosted a small baby shower. I attended HOA meetings, smiled, nodded, and stayed quiet. We didn't want trouble. We wanted peace. But peace in Maplewood Estates came with rules, and breaking even one of them meant you were on Karen's list. And that list was about to cost us everything. The first sign of trouble came one sunny Thursday morning. Emily had just finished watering her plants when Karen marched across the lawn, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, her heels stabbing the grass like she owned it. "Mrs. Harris," she called, without even pretending to smile. "Do you realize your garden hose has been left uncoiled? That's a tripping hazard. Against HOA Safety Code 14C. Emily blinked, confused, then gently replied, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was just about to," but Karen had already started snapping photos. "We can't make exceptions. You'll get a warning letter." That was how it began, innocent on the surface, venom underneath. Within days, we started receiving notices, one for our car being too close to the curb, another because the color of our porch light was not within HOA standards, and then, absurdly, one for using gardening tools before 9 a.m. I remember Emily showing me the stack of letters on our kitchen counter, her voice breaking. I've lived here 2 months and already feel like a criminal. I tried to calm her down. Don't worry, she's just power hungry. People like her thrive on control. But I underestimated Karen. That weekend, during the neighborhood cleanup, Emily volunteered to help plant new flowers along the main gate. Everyone seemed grateful except Karen. We appreciate your enthusiasm, she said in a syrupy tone, but those aren't the HOA approved marigold variety. You'll need to replant them. Even the volunteers looked uncomfortable. Emily's hands froze, the trowel hanging midair. They're marigolds, she whispered, but Karen just smiled and walked off. It wasn't about flowers. It was about humiliation. Over time, Karen's eyes followed us everywhere. She'd appear when we parked the car, when we took evening walks, even when Emily hung baby clothes on the porch. Sometimes I'd catch her peering through her curtains, her phone camera barely hidden behind lace. Then one afternoon, I came home to find a bright pink violation sticker slapped on our door, bold letters screaming, "Final warning, noncompliance." Emily stood inside, holding the letter, tears running down her cheeks. She said she'll report us to the HOA board and maybe even get us evicted. I clenched the paper in my fist until it crumpled. She picked the wrong family. But deep down, I still thought I could reason with her, appeal to her logic. I didn't yet know that logic didn't exist in her world. That night, as the wind howled through the oaks, I caught my first glimpse of Karen's shadow under our porch light, watching, waiting, smiling. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how to destroy you, one rule at a time. After that final warning, things in Maplewood Estates changed. The air felt heavier. Conversations stopped when we walked by. People who once waved now looked the other way. Word spreads fast in communities like ours, and Karen controlled every whisper. One morning, I found our mailbox stuffed with anonymous notes. Follow the rules or leave. HOA doesn't need troublemakers. Keep your wife under control. Each note was unsigned, printed in the same font. Karen's handiwork, no doubt. Emily tried to stay strong. She'd smile for me, hum while cooking, talk to our unborn baby every night. But I could see the tension in her hands, the way she flinched at every knock on the door. One evening, while I was out at a late meeting, she called me crying. "Karen's here again," she whispered. "She's in the driveway, taking pictures of our car." I told her to lock the doors and record everything. When I arrived 15 minutes later, Karen was still there, phone raised, flash on, pretending to measure the driveway with a tape. I stepped out of my car, calm but firm. "Karen, this has to stop." She didn't even blink. "Mr. Harris, we have standards. You're in violation of parking regulations 9A and 9C. If you can't follow them, perhaps Maplewood isn't the right fit for you." Her tone dripped with mock civility, but her eyes told the truth. This was personal. I took a step closer. "This is harassment." Karen smirked. "Oh no, this is maintenance." That was the night I realized she wasn't just enforcing rules, she was building a war. The next morning, our trash bins were overturned. Two of Emily's flower pots shattered. A dead crow was left near our fence, feathers scattered like a message. I checked the security camera footage, but somehow the files from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. were corrupted. When I confronted the HOA board, they shrugged. "Karen's been here for years. She runs things by the book," one member said, avoiding eye contact. The message was clear. Nobody would stand against her. At home, Emily tried to hold my hand and whisper, "Let's not fight them. Let's just leave." But I looked around at our home, the nursery we painted, the crib we built, the future we imagined, and something in me hardened. "No," I said quietly. "We're not leaving. Not this time." That night, for the first time in my life, I began to understand what power really meant and how far I'd go to protect my family. A week later, the tension finally exploded. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind that should have smelled like coffee and fresh cut grass. Instead, the air reeked of something sharp, like gasoline and anger. Emily was trimming the hedge out front when Karen showed up again, marching across the street in her crisp yellow HOA shirt, a rolled-up stack of papers in hand. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her voice carried venom. "I warned you, Mrs. Harris," she barked. "That hedge is exactly 4 inches taller than regulation allows. You're devaluing this neighborhood." Emily set down the trimmer, exhausted. "Karen, please. I'm 7 months pregnant. I can barely bend down. The hedge is fine." Karen scoffed. "Pregnancy isn't an excuse for laziness." That word, laziness, snapped something inside Emily. "You have no right to talk to me that way," she shouted back, her voice shaking. From my office window upstairs, I heard the argument and bolted outside. By the time I reached them, Karen had crossed onto our lawn, pointing the papers like a weapon. "I filed 3 complaints. You're about to be fined thousands. And if you can't handle that, maybe you should move back to wherever you." Enough? I cut in, stepping between them. Karen stopped mid-sentence. The corners of her lips curled into a grin that chilled me. "Oh, I see. The husband speaks now. Figures." I clenched my jaw. "You're trespassing. Leave." She took a deliberate step closer, her perfume mixing with the sharp smell of fertilizer. "You think you're above the rules because your wife is pregnant? Because you have money? Everyone here plays by my standards." Emily's breathing turned fast, shallow. "Please, let's just go inside," she whispered. But Karen wasn't done. She snatched a flower from the hedge and crushed it between her fingers. This is what happens when people think they're special. I didn't realize my voice was trembling until I heard it. "If you ever step on my property again, you'll regret it." Karen leaned in, her eyes dark and steady. "Oh, Mr. Harris, I already do." That night, I found tire tracks across our driveway and muddy footprints near our porch. The next morning, our mailbox was smashed. It wasn't vandalism anymore. It was a message. And in that moment, standing over the shattered wood, I realized this wouldn't end with warnings or fines. Someone was going to get hurt. A week later, the tension finally exploded. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind that should have smelled like coffee and fresh cut grass. Instead, the air reeked of something sharp, like gasoline and anger. Emily was trimming the hedge out front when Karen showed up again, marching across the street in her crisp yellow HOA shirt, a rolled-up stack of papers in hand. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her voice carried venom. "I warned you, Mrs. Harris," she barked. "That hedge is exactly 4 inches taller than regulation allows. You're devaluing this neighborhood." Emily set down the trimmer, exhausted. "Karen, please. I'm 7 months pregnant. I can barely bend down. The hedge is fine." Karen scoffed. "Pregnancy isn't an excuse for laziness." That word, laziness, snapped something inside Emily. "You have no right to talk to me that way," she shouted back, her voice shaking. From my office window upstairs, I heard the argument and bolted outside. By the time I reached them, Karen had crossed onto our lawn, pointing the papers like a weapon. "I've filed 3 complaints. You're about to be fined thousands. And if you can't handle that, maybe you should move back to wherever you." Enough? I cut in, stepping between them. Karen stopped mid-sentence. The corners of her lips curled into a grin that chilled me. "Oh, I see. The husband speaks now. Figures." I clenched my jaw. "You're trespassing. Leave." She took a deliberate step closer, her perfume mixing with the sharp smell of fertilizer. "You think you're above the rules because your wife is pregnant? Because you have money? Everyone here plays by my standards." Emily's breathing turned fast, shallow. "Please, let's just go inside," she whispered. But Karen wasn't done. She snatched a flower from the hedge and crushed it between her fingers. This is what happens when people think they're special. I didn't realize my voice was trembling until I heard it. "If you ever step on my property again, you'll regret it." Karen leaned in, her eyes dark and steady. "Oh, Mr. Harris, I already do." That night, I found tire tracks across our driveway and muddy footprints near our porch. The next morning, our mailbox was smashed. It wasn't vandalism anymore. It was a message. And in that moment, standing over the shattered wood, I realized this wouldn't end with warnings or fines. Someone was going to get hurt. It happened 2 nights later, the night that split my life into before and after. The rain started just after sunset, thin at first, then heavy enough to blur the streetlights. I remember Emily laughing softly while making tea. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly round and beautiful, the baby kicking so hard she joked he'd grow up to be a boxer. For the first time in weeks, the house felt peaceful. The cameras were recording, the doors locked, and I was beginning to believe maybe the worst had passed. Then came the knock. 3 short, sharp knocks, the kind that sound like a demand, not a request. Emily looked at me. "It's late," she said. I frowned, heading toward the door. But before I reached it, I heard her voice, that sharp, nasal tone that had become a part of our nightmares. "Mr. Harris, we need to talk." It was Karen, standing on our porch, drenched, hair plastered to her face, yellow HOA shirt clinging to her like a warning sign. "I don't think now's a good time," I said through the door. But she wasn't here for permission. She shoved the door open with her shoulder, water splashing across the floor. "You humiliated me," she screamed. "You made me a joke in front of my own board." Emily stood up from the couch, startled. "Karen, please." Karen's eyes locked on her, and something in them flickered. Anger, envy, madness. "You think you're better than me? You and your perfect little family." I stepped forward, blocking her path. "Leave now before I call the police." She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You? The big man?" Hiding behind cameras and titles. Then it happened so fast, I didn't even see it until it was over. A flash of silver. A gasp. A sound like air being punched out of lungs. Emily's body jerked. Her hand went to her stomach. Blood bloomed across her dress like crimson spreading through water. For a second, the world froze. The sound of the rain vanished. Even the lightning outside went silent. "Emily!" I caught her before she fell, my hands pressing over the wound, feeling her heartbeat flutter under my palm. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. "Our baby." Karen dropped the knife, her breath ragged. She came at me. "It was self-defense," she stammered, backing away, but her voice trembled. "You stabbed a pregnant woman," I growled, standing up, my voice deeper than I'd ever heard it. "You just ended your life." Sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors must have heard the screams. I didn't look away from Karen, not even when the lights of the ambulance flashed through the rain-soaked windows. She stumbled backward, muttering nonsense. "You'll ruin me. I'll sue you. You don't know who you're dealing with." I took a slow step forward. "No, Karen, you don't know who you're dealing with." 2 officers tackled her as paramedics rushed to Emily's side. I rode in the ambulance, gripping my wife's hand, praying under my breath. At the hospital, doctors moved fast, lights, monitors, urgent voices echoing down white hallways. I wasn't chief minister now. I was just a man begging God not to take his family. When the nurse finally stepped out, her eyes softened. "She's alive," she said, "and so is the baby." I nearly collapsed. Through the glass window, I saw Emily lying pale, but breathing, one hand on her belly. My heart ached, both in pain and gratitude. Outside, thunder rolled through the night. Karen was in custody. My wife and child were alive. But as I stood there in that cold hospital corridor, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. It had only begun. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Those first hours blurred into each other. Doctors rushing past, monitors beeping, the hiss of oxygen, the hum of rain still echoing from outside. I sat beside Emily's bed, holding her hand, tracing circles on her wrist like it could keep her here with me. She looked so fragile under those white sheets, eyes half open, face pale. Is the baby okay?" she whispered. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "He's strong, just like his mother." Her lips trembled, tears pooling. She meant to kill me. I couldn't answer. I just pulled her closer, my throat too tight to speak. I could still feel the warmth of her blood on my hands. Outside the room, I saw two officers standing guard, state security. I'd called within minutes of arriving. When one of them spotted me, his face changed. "Sir, Chief Minister?" he asked quietly, almost disbelieving. I gave a small nod. The word spread fast. Within an hour, half the hospital knew who I was. And by dawn, every reporter in the city did too. But at that moment, none of it mattered. Titles meant nothing next to the sight of my wife fighting for her life. Karen had been arrested on the spot, screaming about self-defense even as they cuffed her. But I'd seen her eyes, wild, unhinged, fueled by some personal hatred I'd never understand. Neighbors who had stayed silent for months were suddenly calling the police, sending videos, offering statements. Everyone wanted to help after the blood was on the pavement. But where were they when she harassed us? When she stalked my wife? When she crossed that line the first 100 times? As I sat there through the night, the guilt sank in too. I should have acted sooner. I should have used my power, my influence before it came to this. A nurse entered quietly with a warm blanket. "Sir, your wife's stable now," she said, "but she'll need rest and counseling. This kind of trauma doesn't fade easily." I nodded, but my mind wasn't in that room anymore. It was across the street, in that bright yellow HOA house where Karen once ruled like a queen. She thought she could control everyone. But now, she'd face the one thing she couldn't bully or manipulate, the law. And I was going to make sure justice didn't just knock on her door, it would tear it down. By morning, the hospital hallway outside Emily's room looked more like a press briefing than a recovery ward. Uniformed officers, detectives, and security staff formed a silent wall while reporters tried to push through. The world had finally learned who I was and what Karen Mitchell had done. The lead detective, Captain Reynolds, stood before me holding a folder. "Sir, we've reviewed the footage from your porch cameras. It's airtight. She forced entry, assaulted your wife, and the knife has her prints." I took a deep breath. I want every part of this handled by the book. No shortcuts. No headlines until she's formally charged. He nodded. "Understood, sir. But it's ugly. The press is already calling her the HOA psycho." I didn't flinch. Let them call her what she is. Inside the room, Emily stirred awake again. Her voice was soft, trembling. She kept saying I ruined her, like she blamed me for something. I sat beside her. People like her don't need reasons, just excuses. As the investigation deepened, more details surfaced. Karen had a history of harassment complaints, not just in Maplewood, but in 2 previous communities. Each time, she manipulated the HOA board, drove families out, then moved on before things got legal. But this time, her victim wasn't anonymous. Within 24 hours, the footage went viral. Clips of Karen screaming, trespassing, and finally being arrested replayed on every network. The internet labeled her the suburban tyrant. Meanwhile, I gave only one short statement outside the hospital. My wife and child survived by God's mercy. But this isn't about titles or power. It's about every family that's been silenced by people who think control is a right. That ends now. Behind me, the cameras flashed like lightning. I didn't care for the politics. I cared about the message. Karen was charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and criminal trespassing. She pleaded not guilty, claiming she'd acted in panic. But her calmness on camera told another story, one of cold calculation. When Captain Reynolds handed me the final evidence report, he said, quietly, "Sir, if you hadn't installed those cameras, she might have gotten away with it." I nodded, staring at the printed still frames, Karen mid-swing, knife flashing, rain pouring down. I thought of Emily's face that night, the sound of her scream, the blood, the silence. Justice was coming for Karen. But for me, it would never be enough until I saw her look into my eyes as the verdict was read. 3 weeks later, the courthouse was overflowing. Journalists packed the hallways, microphones stretched toward every doorway, and news vans lined the street like vultures waiting for a story to drop dead. But inside wasn't politics or spectacle for me. It was personal. Emily sat beside me, still recovering, her hand resting on her belly protectively. The baby had survived, but her body and spirit were still healing. Every time Karen's name was mentioned, I felt her hand tighten around mine. Karen entered the courtroom wearing a gray suit instead of her usual HOA yellow, but arrogance still dripped from her posture. She glanced toward me and smirked, as if this were some neighborhood squabble rather than attempted murder. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Vega, called the court to order. "We are here to determine the charges of assault and attempted homicide against the defendant, Karen Mitchell." The prosecution opened with the footage. The moment Karen shoved open our door, the glint of the knife, Emily's cry, the silence afterward, the jury flinched, then came the medical reports, the testimony from the paramedics, and the HOA members who finally found their courage. One by one, they described her pattern, threats, fines, humiliation tactics, and the unspoken fear that ruled the community. Karen's attorney tried every trick, claiming emotional distress, postpartum trauma, even alleged provocation. But the evidence was a wall she couldn't climb. When it was my turn to testify, the room fell silent. I stood, straightened my tie, and looked at the jury, not as a politician, but as a husband. "I'm not here as a chief minister," I said. "I'm here as a man who watched his wife bleed because someone decided their rules mattered more than human life." We talk about property values, community order, HOA standards, but what about decency? What about empathy? I paused, letting the silence stretch. She didn't just stab my wife. She stabbed everything this neighborhood pretended to stand for. Karen glared at me, her lips tightening. The defense called her next. She walked slowly to the stand, tears glistening, performer's tears. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she said, voice trembling just enough for the cameras. "I was afraid. He was threatening me. I panicked." Her act might have worked on someone else, but not after what we'd lived. The prosecutor pressed play again, audio from the incident. Karen's voice echoed through the courtroom. "You think you're better than me? You and your perfect little family?" Then the sound of the knife hitting the floor. The silence afterward. When it ended, no one spoke. Even her attorney looked defeated. The judge's voice broke the stillness. "Court will recess until the verdict is ready." As we waited, Emily leaned toward me. "She doesn't regret it," she whispered. "She regrets being caught." I nodded. "And that's why I'll make sure she never hurts anyone again." When the jury returned, their faces told the story before the words did. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, guilty. On the charge of trespassing and harassment, guilty. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder through the courtroom. Karen's mask finally cracked, eyes wide, jaw trembling. She turned to me, mouth opening like she wanted to speak. But I just looked back, calm, silent, unmoved. For the first time, she realized her power meant nothing, not in front of truth, not in front of justice. The courtroom emptied slowly, but I stayed seated. The sound of footsteps and murmurs faded until it was just me, Emily, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Karen was still there too, standing beside two deputies, wrists cuffed, face pale beneath layers of arrogance, finally cracking. Justice Vega had pronounced her sentence, 20 years without parole. But I needed one last look. Not for revenge, just for closure. When the guards began leading her away, I stood. "Wait," I said quietly. They paused, glancing at me for permission. I walked closer until we were face to face across the aisle. She met my gaze with something between hate and disbelief. "You think this makes you righteous?" she hissed. "You ruined my life." I exhaled slowly. "You ruined your own life the moment you chose cruelty over compassion." Her lip trembled, eyes darting like she wanted to find someone else to blame. "You think anyone cares about you? About her?" She nodded toward Emily, her voice sharp as glass. "The moment you're gone, they'll forget." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "Maybe they will, but you won't. You'll remember every day that you stabbed a pregnant woman because her flowers didn't fit your standards." Her defiance faltered. For the first time, I saw fear, Not anger, not superiority, just raw fear. You used your power to intimidate people, I continued. I used mine to protect them. That's the difference between us. Emily stood beside me then, her presence quiet but unyielding. She didn't say a word, just looked Karen in the eyes, a calm, steady look that said more than anger ever could. Karen tried to look away, but couldn't. Her mask finally shattered. Tears spilled, but they weren't the kind that came from guilt. They were the kind that came when a tyrant realizes her reign is truly over. The guards led her toward the exit. The door shut behind her with a heavy metallic click, a sound that felt like justice. Emily turned to me, whispering, "It's over." But I shook my head gently. "No," I said, "it's just beginning." She frowned, confused. I took her hand. For years, HOA boards across the state have allowed people like her to bully families. We're going to change that. Her eyes softened. "You mean?" I nodded. "I'm passing a new law. No homeowner will ever live in fear again." Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, microphones surged forward. But all I saw was my wife, smiling faintly in the morning light, her hand resting on her belly. Karen was gone. Justice was done. And for the first time in months, the air felt clean again. 6 months later, the seasons had changed. The spring air carried the scent of lilacs again, the same flowers Emily once planted before the chaos began. Only now our garden looked different, stronger, fuller, touched by the kind of peace that only comes after surviving a storm. Our son, Ethan, had just turned 3 months old. Every time I held him, I thought of that night, the knife, the rain, the sirens, and how close we came to losing everything. But life, somehow, had chosen to let us stay. Emily was healing. The scars had faded, though some nights she still woke, trembling from nightmares. When that happened, I'd pull her close, whisper that we were safe, that the world couldn't touch us anymore. And for the first time, I actually believed it. Karen's house stood empty now. The HOA board dissolved after her conviction, the members quietly resigning one by one. I replaced it with something better, a community compassion initiative where neighborhood disputes were settled with mediation, not intimidation. We passed the Homeowner Protection Act statewide. No one would ever again be bullied by the kind of authority Karen had abused. One afternoon, while pushing Ethan's stroller down the newly repaved sidewalk, I saw Mrs. Lane, one of the older neighbors, watering her flowers. She waved shyly. "We're so glad you stayed, Mr. Harris," she said. "This place feels human again." I smiled. It was always supposed to be. That night, as the sun dipped behind the oak trees, I sat on the porch beside Emily. The same porch where everything began, the laughter, the fear, the blood. Only now there was quiet. She looked at me with a soft smile. "Do you ever think you'll forgive her?" I thought about it for a long moment. The rain, the trial, her smirk, the sound of my wife's scream, all of it flashing through my mind. "No," I said finally, "but I can move on." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening in the twilight. "Then that's enough." We sat in silence, listening to the crickets, the faint hum of a world that had finally gone still. The wind carried the smell of jasmine. Ethan stirred softly in his crib inside, and as the porch light flickered to life, I whispered to myself, "Some wars end not with vengeance, but with peace." For the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.